Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. I'm your host, Kimberly, and today I have a very special guest with me chatting about executive functioning skills. So what they are and why they're important and how to build on them. Now, of course, those of you who have listened to The Parent Solution before, you know that learning skills is not a race to the finish line, although there are people who will try to tell you otherwise. This guest and I have a lot in common when it comes to our views on a specific problem that we both see relating to these skills, or rather the lack of these skills. And we're planning on talking about that today. And hopefully we're able to provide some rational solutions for our listeners here. Today, I have Chris Loper with me. Chris is a tutor, writer, and a habit coach. He writes for Northwest Educational Services and for becomingbetter.org. He's also the co-creator of a 5-part course called Parenting for Academic Success and Parental Sanity. Chris, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Great to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. I think we wanted to kind of start this discussion talking about the lack of proper education. And when I say education, we kind of understand that we're not talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic. We're talking about soft skills, like our executive functioning skills. So for our listeners, I know you and I know this already, but for our listeners, can we maybe define what executive functioning skills are?
Yeah. Executive function is usually spoken of in the singular, and it's really a set of different functions, mostly performed by your prefrontal cortex. Executive function is kind of like the CEO of your brain. It's the kind of the planner, the decider, the part of your brain that organizes your life, decides what's important, exerts willpower, and makes good choices. And it's really a mix of cognitive skills, social skills, and emotional skills.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't like a one thing to do to like have executive function or fix, inadequate executive function. There's lots and lots of little things you could do to improve.
Right. I like how you said it's the CEO of your brain. I've always kind of known that, but I've never really heard it put that way before. Yeah, as far as I think making sure that there are things that you can do to increase your executive function and to increase those sorts of skills, you're right. There's not something that's like, it's like a one and done, one size fits all, like do this and your executive function will be great. So I think that's also an important point to make, is that there's not one sort of solid step for every single person. There are different patterns and there are different activities. Now I know you have a little bit more experience than I do in this area. Are you able to speak to that at all? Like in terms of what your experience has been in teaching children?
Yeah. So I work with lots of students who need executive function support and need executive functioning skills. Usually they're in late middle school, early high school. Often they have ADHD or they're on the autism spectrum, or they're just, a young kid with an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, because that's the part of our brain that does executive function, and it doesn't stop developing until you're about 25.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's super normal for kids of that age to struggle. And they struggle basically because that brain muscle that does executive function isn't strong because they haven't exercised it enough. And they also lack like the concrete skills of executive function, like writing things down instead of just holding it in your head, or like thinking, oh yeah, I need to talk to my teacher about that tomorrow. And then they just kind of think they'll remember it in the moment. And then of course they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why don't we send the teacher an email right now? Because we have that power, and that'll kind of queue up, more minds to help us remember.
Right.
Or, they need to practice using reminders, and, like setting cell phone reminders, or they need to practice putting their cell phone in airplane mode and setting it out of view so they can actually focus on their work.
I sense that that's because you mentioned you work with mostly like like middle school or high school, so a little bit older, anywhere from like 11, 12, and onwards. Um, and I sense that that's a personal thing for you, the phones, putting the phones on airplane mode and putting it out of view so that it's not distracting. I find in my own experience with teaching, it's very, very helpful to have students, okay, put the phone down. We are stepping away from the phone for like an hour, or for an hour and a half, or for 2 hours, whatever it might be, right? So that you
Mhm.
can focus and you can have that steady stream of discipline and that it takes to be able to focus when you're working on something rather than getting interrupted every 5 minutes by a notification. And I think
Yeah.
I think that it is very much true that in the society that we live in, technology is great. Technology is wonderful. It allows us to do so many things. But the fact of the matter is that you have to know how to control technology and not let technology control you. When it comes to
Right.
kids and their development with executive function and executive functioning skills, I feel like technology, or rather the limitations, proper boundary limitations that are put in place with technology, are quite helpful as long as it's done
Hmm.
correctly.
Yeah. And this
Mm-hmm.
is a huge challenge for modern parents.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it is so easy to get this wrong as a parent. And the way to get it wrong as a parent is to do the intuitive thing, which is to go like, you need to put your phone away, or for these hours your phone is off, and really dictating what, a ninth grader should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that works about as well as telling a middle schooler that they need to use a planner, or, telling your 11th grader that he needs to get up at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. It doesn't work. Even though it's like the right advice, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to recognize as adults that kids didn't choose this world. We gave them this world. And they've been born into an environment where behind every screen is an army of programmers and psychologists and neuroscientists designing tech to be addictive.
Mm-hmm.
And we make a mistake when we point at them and say, you kid, you have a problem. You're addicted to your phone. You're hooked on video games. You need to quit social media or whatever. That's, well, it may be true that they're addicted and they need to step away from it. That pointing the finger is misguided
Mm-hmm.
because it's not their fault. It's the adults of the world. It's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
And so my approach to that with students is like, I'm tutoring and we're just having a session and their phone is out and it keeps buzzing or something and they keep getting distracted. And after a while, I'll go, it seems like that's bugging you. I don't care that your phone's out, but it seems like that's bugging you. And they're like, yeah, actually kind of wish it would. And I'm like, can I show you something? And I show them my phone. See that little airplane symbol there? Yeah, I'm in airplane mode right now. So
Mm-hmm.
no one can bug me. I'll pull out of airplane mode after the session in case I need to get a hold of somebody, but you know, and they go, oh, I didn't even realize that was an option.
Mm-hmm.
And they're empowered to choose it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't, but often they go like, oh, wow, I want that. And if I had said, hey, you should put your phone in airplane mode, that would just trigger the kind of resistance they get when they get into arguments with their parents.
100%.
You know,
Yep.
you know,
I definitely know where you're coming from. And I know that I really resonate with what you said there. You know, that we as adults have created this world for our children. We gave them this world, yes, but we created this world. And I think there's something very powerful about, placing the blame where it belongs. Yes, it's not necessarily the kid's fault that they're addicted. Is it a problem that needs to be fixed? Absolutely. Is it a problem that needs to be looked at? Yes. Or do boundaries need to be put in place? Yes. There's a proper way to go about that, though, and I love how you come at it with a much more natural sort of perspective. I try to integrate that as well when I'm talking to children, or like about technology, right? And about different things. And it's about making the child see that they themselves, it is a good choice for them themselves. Because if you come at them, especially in teenage years, if you come at them with the same sort of attitude or the same sort of approach that parents so often take of like, put your phone down, don't touch that, don't do that, you know the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it gets a little bit messy because their brains are automatically wired for resistance. It's just the age,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You also, as a tutor, have a different relationship with a child, and as a coach, you have a different relationship with a child than a parent does. I have
Right.
quite literally said one thing. I have quite literally said one thing to a student that I heard from her mother's lips or from her dad's lips, like
Yeah.
all of 5 minutes ago. I say the same thing, and the student wants to listen to me, but doesn't want to listen to her
Mm-hmm.
parents or his parents, and it's going to cause an argument, right? So there's that.
Yeah.
It's a different relationship, and that's, again, that's nobody's fault, and it's not anything bad. It's just looking at things from a different perspective and having that positive adult role model for children. I think that's
Yes.
really important.
And that role model thing is a huge piece, a recurring theme in the parenting course that I teach.
Mm-hmm.
Leading by example is the most powerful way to influence children. Your teenage kids are biologically programmed to resist what you tell them to do, but they're always learning from you, and they're learning by watching what you do.
Mm-hmm.
They might not immediately and perfectly mimic your behavior, but they are watching you, and they're very attuned to hypocrisy. So if you're addicted to your phone, if you're using your phone compulsively at the dinner table, in the checkout line, waiting in the car, whatever, they see that. And so when you tell them to put their phone away, they're like, no, you don't. Why would I?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you might be like thinking, well, but I'm doing work email on my phone. Yeah, kids don't see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. They might understand intellectually that you're doing something productive, but they see it as you're engaging with your phone, and phones are fun.
Right. You're still doing something that involves you being on your phone, but you're telling me not to be on my phone,
Mm-hmm.
or my tablet, or my iPad, or my whatever it might be, right? Whatever the
Yeah.
distraction. I do find that phones are a big one, just because a lot of people have them, and they're so common. But I know that the same sort of patterns can occur with any sort of online tool or any sort of tech, really.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
was addicted to Nintendo 64 when I was a kid.
really, and
Yeah. Yeah.
how did
Old
your
school video
parents deal with
games.
that?
Um, they were concerned that I spent too much time having fun and not enough time doing homework.
Right.
And then I said, oh, well, I have to prove you wrong. And so I earned good grades. And then they got off my back.
Wow, impressive. That opens up
And sometimes that's my message to students, because they will
right.
get upset that their parents are always nagging them. And I go, okay, well, what do you think they're worried about?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that I'm not going to get good grades. Okay. What could you do to, get rid of that worry? I could, get all my homework in and study, and, and it's like, so if you start proving that you got it under control by what you bring home on a report card, then, mom and dad might back off. They'll
Mm-hmm.
feel safe, relaxing a bit.
Right, because they see the evidence. I love it. The approach seems to be student centered, which is very much a part of how I operate, and I love how you do that. That is fantastic. So your experience in terms of executive functioning skills, and I know that we've talked about executive function as well, and all of these things kind of tie in together. So what are you currently doing with students or with people that you work with to help them develop that skill of executive function, or multiple different skills?
Most common thing I do is encourage people to write things down.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I'm working with an adult as a habit coach or working with a student who's just trying to keep track of homework, the most common thing we do is we engage with the world and we think things through, and then we look at stuff and we don't write it down. And there's a phrase I like that, I think from David Allen: brains are for having ideas, not for holding them. So, it's like, your brain's job is to come up with ideas, but it's not designed to hold them. Your brain can only hold on to about 4 things at once in the moment. That's your working memory limit on a good day. We need to offload and put stuff down, by creating reminders, putting things on paper, making to-do lists, using sticky notes. Yeah. You write things on your hand. I don't care. Just get it down somewhere. And often, students will buy into that because of the way I offer it, but because they haven't practiced that skill, their default is to not write it down or to not set a reminder on their phone for the thing they need to remember tomorrow. And so they need, reminders from me to use reminders.
Right. Because it's about creating the healthier habits that need to be put in place.
Yeah. It's just really hard to change your behavior. It takes many, many repetitions before it starts to become automatic.
Yes. I think it's something like 90 days. I haven't necessarily looked into like all the scientific evidence, but I think it's something like 90 days to be able to build a habit, but it only takes I think 45 days or half the time to break it, regardless of what the actual numbers are. The point being, it takes longer to put habits in place than it does to break them. So keeping on top of that sort of thing is I think a better idea than just kind of letting it slide.
Yeah. And the length of time it takes to establish a habit depends a lot on how consistent you are. So this is something I work with adults exclusively on, like habit coaching. Then it's like short-term work. But I'll sprinkle this into my work with students where, like, if you try to do something, every other day or a few times a week, you're going to have a really hard time establishing that habit. If you do it every single day at the same time in your day, it's going to become ingrained really fast. You want to link it into a pre-existing routine in your day and have it be part. It's like, so right after I brush my teeth, I go and I do a push-up.
Just one.
Just
one.
This is really common with students working on like standardized test prep, where, if you're a real go-getter in America, you're a junior in high school. And so you're working really hard as a junior because it's your hardest year of high school. And you might be prepping for the SAT or the ACT or AP tests. And those are these distant goals. There's no it's not due tomorrow. There's no test at the end of the week. It's months out. So it's really hard to get yourself to do this thing. I'm like, we need to have a rhythm where before your homework every day, you crack open that prep book and you do 5 minutes. And maybe eventually it builds up to be more than 5 minutes, but initially you got to just be consistent.
Consistency is key. I like how you said that, you brush your teeth and then you go do one push-up. Like, it doesn't matter what exactly the number is or whatever, but starting small with those tiny little goals is much more realistic and much more achievable. And I think that oftentimes we as people, but particularly students, try to take on too much at once, or try to do too much at once. That's new, right?
Yes.
Instead of just implementing one little thing at a time. I have found for myself that's a game changer, right? Like, don't try to do everything all at once. Make small changes, make small improvements, and commit. You're right. Commitment and consistency is one of the biggest, or I'd say 2 of the biggest things that are important when it comes to building good habits, including your executive function skills, because it's going to help you with making those good habits.
I was going to say that is an excellent place for parents to lead by example, because I've never met a grown up, under the age of 55 who didn't have something they were trying to work on,
right?
Or, thinking this, my doctor says I really should, and I don't, or whatever, or I should really get back into reading, or, and, you can use that as an opportunity to actively model for your kids that behavioral change is hard. Don't pretend it's easy. And don't just do it with brute force willpower. Be strategic. Like actively employ like habit formation strategies that make it easier. And then, maybe your kids see that and go like, hey, why is dad, putting X's on a calendar every day after he does a push-up? I don't understand. Maybe that opens the door to a little conversation about why you're doing that and, why you're approaching it that way.
I love it. Leading by example is one of the biggest things that I think parents can do for their children. And this is the parent solution. So I would say that that's a very good place to start in terms of what solution we're offering to parents whose children are suffering with, or maybe suffering is not the right word, maybe struggling, or finding it a challenge would be an appropriate phrase, with executive function skills and with the keeping on track and with the idea of creating good habits, because if you create good habits as a young teenager or a young adult, those habits follow you for the rest of your life, hopefully, if you keep yourself in check. And I think that would be the solution that we're kind of talking about here. So, Chris, we've talked about ideas that parents can kind of implement at home, and we talked about things that parents can kind of do and model for their children. What would be your sort of advice for parents who are looking to get some support, either within the educational system, the current educational system, or by looking at alternative opportunities if they're looking for some help elsewhere?
So there's, obviously many inadequacies in our current educational system, despite how far it's come in the last, 60 years. And what I see often is parents get frustrated by the shortcomings of the school system or how it doesn't meet their child's needs. Sometimes kids actually have bad teachers, and parents are, eager to point the finger there. And while, if you feel that way, please go work hard to make the system better. Go protest, go vote, write letters, etc.
Take an active
volunteer
stance
at schools, run for the school board. But the most important thing is for kids to see not you blaming them or blaming the school or blaming the teacher, but to see a proactive response. Because what we need kids to become is active agents in their own success rather than passive victims of an inadequate system. So I really, really want parents to demonstrate, being strategic and resourceful and kind of scaffolding those executive function skills for their kids as appropriate to help them thrive in spite of the inadequacies of our educational system.
And working within the system, you're saying, to be able to give them the tools they need.
Sometimes there are opportunities to step outside of it completely. There are people doing homeschooling, doing microschooling. There are lots of alternative schools. The two school districts I work in, Issaquah and Bellevue, Washington, both have alternative public high schools that are like project-based instead of the standard like rat race kind of school.
Yes.
And for certain kids, they're amazing. And so, if you have those opportunities and it seems right for your kid, go explore, see if that's a good fit. And often it is very, very useful to just get outside help on, through one-on-one tutoring like Kimberly and I do. And as a parent, you can get help too. My colleague, Greg Smith, and I both do parent coaching, and we co-teach this Parenting for Academic Success class. And you quickly discover, if you attended that class, that you're not alone. These struggles are very common, and there are, solutions out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel or just kind of struggle through it.
You just have to know where to look.
Yes.
Yeah. I love it. I love the idea of making, and I'm a huge proponent of this. I know you are as well. And it's why I think we resonate so well together. That it is not the system's responsibility to take care of you and to give you what you need. It is your responsibility as a parent and as a student to be able to find what works for you. And if something's not working, to step outside of it and see what does. And project-based learning, I think, like you mentioned, that there's alternative schools specifically in your district that do that. I think that's fantastic. We don't have enough of them here where I am. So that would be an amazing opportunity, I think, for a lot of kids, because I know that a lot of children learn better when they're able to actually do something, as opposed to sitting in a classroom, right? Particularly young boys. I have a lot of high energy young boys, and they will sit and they will listen, but it's because it's in a small group, right? Or it's one-on-one, and it's a much different environment, right? And they're excited about learning and what they're doing. It's a much different environment than public school. So I really like how you focused on that. I think that's awesome. And I love your parenting course. I might have to sign myself up for that to see what it's all about. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. I really appreciate your time today. And I appreciate all your feedback, all your insights. So thank you. We'll definitely have to have you back.
Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate it.
I sincerely hope that all of the listeners got something of value out of this episode. If you have any comments or questions, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.